My daughter-in-law called herself the owner of my house in front of her friends. Big mistake. Margaret had lived in the same house for over 30 years. She'd raised her son Kevin within those walls, paid off the mortgage with her own hands, and repainted every room herself at least twice. So when Kevin got married and asked if he and his new wife, Ashley, could move in with her for a while to save up for a place of their own, Margaret didn't hesitate. Family helped family. That's how she'd always seen it. She wanted to like Ashley. She really did try. In the beginning, she told herself the awkwardness was just an adjustment period. 2 women learning to share a kitchen. 2 different rhythms trying to find a beat together. But as the months passed, Margaret started to notice a pattern that unsettled her more than she wanted to admit. Ashley lied. Not just the occasional white lie people tell to smooth over an uncomfortable moment, but constant, casual lies about things that didn't even need lying about. She'd tell people she'd graduated from a university she'd never attended. She'd claim she used to work as a creative director at a marketing firm, when in reality she'd worked part-time at a boutique for 8 months before quitting. She told a neighbor once that she and Kevin were saving up to buy their house, the one Margaret was currently standing in when she overheard it through the screen door. Margaret let most of it go. She told herself it wasn't her business how Ashley chose to present herself to the world. Kevin seemed happy, and that was what mattered most. But there was a difference between harmless embellishment and something else entirely. And Margaret was about to find out just how far that something else could go. It started like any other Tuesday. Margaret had a short list of errands, groceries, mostly, and Ashley had mentioned the night before that she might have a couple of girls over for coffee. Margaret didn't think much of it. She grabbed her purse, told Kevin she'd be back within the hour, and left for the store. When she returned, her arms full of grocery bags, she let herself in through the garage door, the way she always did. It opened directly into the kitchen, and as she nudged the door shut behind her with her hip, she could hear voices coming from the living room. Ashley's, bright and animated, along with the light chatter and laughter of what sounded like 3 or 4 other women. Margaret set the bags down quietly on the counter, not out of any intention to eavesdrop, but simply because the door was still cracked and the voices carried. Then she heard her own house being discussed. "Honestly, it's been such a dream having this space," Ashley was saying, her voice smooth and practiced. The kind of tone people use when they've told a story so many times they've started to believe it themselves. "When my mother-in-law finally moved out to the guest cottage, Kevin and I just took over the main house. It's ours now, officially. We're so lucky. There was no guest cottage. There never had been." Margaret stood frozen by the counter, a bag of onions still clutched in one hand, feeling something cold settle low in her stomach. Then she heard Kevin's voice, not correcting her, not saying a word, just a soft, non-committal laugh, the sound of a man who had heard something wrong and decided the path of least resistance was silence. That single laugh hurt almost as much as Ashley's lie. Her own son, standing right there, had let it happen. Margaret didn't move for a long moment. She thought about all the small things she'd let slide over the past year, the exaggerations, the little inventions, the moments she'd told herself weren't worth the conflict. She thought about the mortgage payments she'd made alone for 3 decades, the roof she'd reshingled after a storm the year Kevin left for college, the kitchen she was standing in right now, still warm from the morning sun coming through the window over the sink. This was different. This wasn't embellishment. This was erasure. She left the groceries where they were and walked toward the living room. The moment she stepped through the doorway, the conversation died. Ashley was seated in the middle of the couch, teacup balanced delicately on her knee, surrounded by 3 friends who all turned to look at the older woman standing in the doorway. Margaret watched Ashley's face shift, just for an instant. A flicker of alarm quickly smoothed over into something composed and pleasant. "Oh, everyone. This is our housekeeper," Ashley said smoothly, gesturing toward Margaret with an open palm, as though introducing a piece of furniture. "She helps out around the house a few days a week. Would you mind bringing out the tea and that cake from the fridge? Thank you so much." For a moment, Margaret said nothing. She simply looked at her daughter-in-law, taking in the calm, practiced lie, the complete absence of hesitation. Ashley didn't even blink. She had clearly done this before, or something close to it, and Margaret realized with a quiet jolt that this wasn't a spontaneous slip. This was a story Ashley had built and lived in for a while now, one she was comfortable enough with to tell strangers without breaking a sweat. Margaret turned toward the hallway that led to the den, where she could hear the low murmur of a television. "Kevin," she called. "Come here, please." There was a pause, a long one. Long enough that one of Ashley's friends shifted uncomfortably on the couch and reached for her teacup just to have something to do. Finally, Kevin appeared in the doorway, his eyes fixed on the floor, his shoulders drawn in like a man trying to make himself smaller. Margaret didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "Kevin," she said, steady and clear, "please tell these people who I am, and who this house actually belongs to." The room went silent. Kevin lifted his eyes just enough to glance at his mother, then at Ashley, then back down at the carpet. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, but every word landed. "It's yours, Mom." 3 words. That was all it took. Ashley's face drained of color so fast it was almost startling to watch, like watching the sky change right before a storm. Her teacup clattered against its saucer as she set it down too quickly. "You have embarrassed me," she said, her voice cracking somewhere between fury and humiliation. "In front of my friends," and with that, she stood, spun on her heel, and fled up the stairs, her footsteps pounding against the wood with every step. The friends didn't linger. One by one, they gathered their purses, mumbling apologies to Margaret that she suspected weren't really theirs to give, and let themselves out the front door. Within a few minutes, the house was quiet again, except for the muffled sound of drawers opening and closing upstairs, sharp and hurried. By the time Ashley came back down, she had a suitcase in each hand and her jaw set tight. She didn't look at Margaret. She told Kevin flatly that they were leaving, and he followed her out to the car without a word of protest, carrying the rest of her things behind her like he'd done it 100 times before. It was only at the very end, standing by the open car door, that Kevin turned back and looked at his mother one more time. "Can I still come visit sometime?" he asked. Margaret looked at her son for a long moment. She thought about the year that had just passed, about every lie she'd let slide to keep the peace, about the silence in the living room when it mattered. "Most. You have a choice, Kevin," she said finally. "You can come see me if you leave her, or you can stay with Ashley and you don't come back at all." He didn't answer right away. He glanced toward the car, where Ashley sat rigid in the passenger seat, staring straight ahead through the windshield. Then he looked back at his mother, and Margaret already knew, before he even opened his mouth, what he was going to say. "I'm staying with her." He got in the car without another word. Margaret stood in the driveway and watched them pull away, the taillights shrinking down the street until they turned the corner and disappeared completely. She didn't cry. She thought she might later, in the quiet of the evening when the house felt too big and too silent. But that moment never came. Instead, she walked back inside, closed the door behind her, and finished putting away the groceries that were still sitting on the counter exactly where she'd left them. It's been a while now since that day. The house is quiet in a way it hasn't been in years, but it's a peaceful kind of quiet, not a lonely one. Margaret has her mornings back, her kitchen back, her home entirely back. She doesn't regret the choice she gave her son, even though it cost her his presence in her life. Some doors, once you understand what walking through them cost you, aren't worth opening again, not until the person on the other side is ready to be honest about what's really on the other side of them.